Good. Hey students, I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, so I'm going to be recording and sharing this Zoom lecture about Roman theater technology and laughs with me, the best teacher in the world, Dr. Witt. Anyway, let's get started. So I'm going to be going through this lecture, and I want you to pause the video if you want to take notes or anything like that. Cool? So, Roman theaters and technology. Last class, we sort of talked about the evolution of Roman theater and that they started with temporary theaters, which were usually set up on like the banks of like a dry riverbed, just for small festivities. And once theater became more popular in Rome, the Romans went on to use and improve upon the Greek theaters. Now, remember, they did some innovations here. One is they walled the orchestra, which was previously for when the chorus would perform there only. But they walled it, and then they used that for VIP seating of like senators and important people. And finally, they raised the stage a little bit, the pulpitum stage. Now, we have this date, 55 BC. So that's an important date to remember for your midterm, because that is the day, that's the year that the Romans complete the Theater of Pompeii in Rome. Now, this is important because it is the, let's read it here, first Roman-built permanent freestanding theater space. So that's important. Break that down. First Roman-built permanent. So Romans built this and it's permanent. Also, it's freestanding. So that's an innovation on top of what the Greeks did. Remember, the Greeks had theaters that were built into the hillsides, limited by geography of the area. Romans, not so. They had freestanding theaters which were in their urban areas. Cool stuff, huh? And also, as we talked about a little bit before with Gladiator and Naumachia, that even though we had these cool theaters, these interesting architectural structures which are downtown in urban settings, they were also threatened by, maybe not threatened by, but they were competing directly with chariot races, boxing matches, dancing exhibitions, gladiator fights, stuff like that. Right? So theater is one among a range of entertainments or spectacles that the average Roman could go attend. Here's a depiction of the Theater of Pompeii in Rome. It is not standing anymore. In fact, I'll put a link to a video in the description below that shows people walking in contemporary Rome and seeing where the Theater of Pompeii was. But if you take a look at this image here on the right side where I have the arrows, that sort of semicircular theater is the Theater of Pompeii. So it's named Pompey, not Pompeii. Right? Pompeii is that city where the volcano covered everything in Rome. Not Pompeii, but Pompey, named after one of the, I think was a council or one of the very important rich people in Rome at that time who sponsored this theater. So I'll put a link to this video in the description below. But one thing to remember about the Theater of Pompeii, and this is sort of a 3D reconstruction of it, is that it more than doubled the audiences of the Greek theaters. Remember the Theater of Dionysus? They said about 14,000. Well, this is 40,000. That's a lot, more than double the size. You had a lot of people and in an urban environment. So you didn't have to go outside the city. It could be right downtown. So that's Roman innovation in terms of theater space. Well, we're going to skip that. So take a look at that video in your own time. Here's a basic Roman theater ground plan. You can see the cavea or audience space is here. The orchestra, remember, was walled and where VIPs would sit, so not where the chorus would perform, like in the Greek times. In the Roman times, important people would sit here. You had a raised stage, 3 upstage doors, 2 side doors, and finally a backdrop or facade there. What's interesting to note are these 2 things here, the vomitoria, the VOMs, right? So there's sort of this hallway that would be under the seating area that both the audience and the actors could use to enter or exit this theater space. So gone are those parados, right? Those hallways, parade halls that would lead into the orchestra area of a Greek theater. And instead, these are VOMs or vomitoriums that the Romans would use for their freestanding, architecturally designed theater spaces. Here's a vision of the Theater of Pompeii, sort of 3-dimensionally from the side. You can see the seating area, cavea, with the VOMs here, orchestra space, pulpitum, raised stage, and finally the sine frons or facade. Interesting to note that the Theater of Pompeii also integrated a temple into it, Temple of Venus. Venus, Victrix, that like love, right? We know Venus is the goddess of love, and Victrix, victorious, so the victory of love, was part of this theater space. So even in Roman times, you do see a union of theater and religion. Let's talk about technology. The Romans innovate two or three things. We're going to focus on three things from the Greeks. One is they create the trapdoor, right? Trapdoor, an opening in the floor of the stage. The next thing, which we talked about a little bit, is the facade. They have a sine frons, so a stone permanent architectural background or backdrop sort of to where the action of the play takes place. This allows for, and many playwrights make use of the sine frons as being sort of like a street, because it's sort of like the wall. If you were looking from one side of the street to the other side of the street, you have the street where the actors would be standing on the pulpitum, and then behind them, this sort of backdrop of 3 doors or 5 doors. And that would be sort of like different houses on a street. And the third thing, which we talked about, are the voms or vomitoria, right? So those were the entranceways for the audience and the actors under the seating area. If you go to a big sporting event, a big football game or hockey game, you might enter the space where you will sit and watch the game through an archway, sort of underneath where the stands are, and that would be a vomitoria. The Romans divided things by class. They had sort of plebeians, and then they had different areas of nobility and stuff. So whereas in the Greek times, it was a little bit more diverse, the Roman times had a more strictly defined class system. And finally, the orchestra was still there, but not used for performance, used for seating. Or occasionally, if there was a naumachia or something like that, they could flood it and use it for water scenes. Here's an example, another benefit of 3D technology. People have sort of mocked up what a trap door would look like. The thought was you had some people here sort of going around this winch, which was applied to this rope, which would raise a cage for a wild animal. The cage's door would also be opened, and they could walk up this sort of animal stairs through the trap door and then get to the floor and then fight the gladiator, fight whatever they're going to fight there. So this is an example of how a trapdoor would be used in the Colosseum, but in the theater, much the same thing. So some, I guess, historians, people who were experimenting with seeing how they could put this stuff back together, maybe, tried to rebuild this. And this is an image from the actual Colosseum where they rebuilt one of these sort of elevators, which would be used for animals, but also could be used for people. And they rebuilt it. So I'm going to link you to this video here. It's like a 1-minute video, and it shows you sort of how these, I guess, archaeologists or interested parties put it together and built it. And this is in the actual Colosseum in Rome now. So you can watch this. It's about a 1-minute video. It's worth watching. And there's a real dog, a real wolf that comes out. Pretty cool, huh? So other Greek theaters. Now, this is an example of a Greek theater that is improved by Rome. Remember, Romans didn't do away with the Greek theaters. They improved them and used them. You can see the innovation here. Walled, semicircular orchestra, raised stage, 3 doors upstage with a big facade or sine frons there. The cavia here, the audience here. But I don't think that they use vomitoria, right? Because remember, the Greeks are built into a hillside, so you'd have to like blast through the hill to make a little tunnel to have the audience come in and out. I think they just walk up and down stairs or something like that to get into a Roman improved Greek theater. But the Greeks built those freestanding theaters, remember, all over the Mediterranean. This is a fantastic example here in Libya, North Africa. We can see the Mediterranean Sea here, and you can see the ruins of an ancient Roman city centered around this fantastic, huge theater space. You see some really cool detail here too. So once again, through the doorway, if you look right through the middle, you can see the Mediterranean Ocean there out the back. But we have all the aspects of the Roman theater. Semicircular walled orchestra, raised stage, 3 doors upstage, 2 doors stage right and stage left, and the cavea audience seating area, all made out of stone, permanent, freestanding, and in a, as we can see here, urban environment. You can even see some of the details on this stuff, right? Historians think these are like actors preparing to perform or getting ready for their character, wearing costumes. This one, if you can see on the right side, is maybe holding a mask, uh, as if they're rehearsing, perhaps. On southern France as well, your book points out a theater at Orange, France. That's still standing. You can see it here too. All the classic hallmarks of the Roman theater are here, and you can even see there's still houses around it today. It's still in a freestanding urban theater. This video is a great walkthrough of another well-preserved Roman improved Greek theater in what's now Amman, Jordan. If you just take a few minutes to look at that video, it's great. I'll once again put that link right below this video. Now, let's move on from architecture and technology to laughs. That means comedy, jokes. I got a million of them. So, some general conventions of Roman comedy. Let's go through them. First, we talked about this before, but the elimination of the chorus. The Greeks love the chorus, Romans not so much. Eliminated the chorus for their comedies. The chorus comes back for tragedies, but we'll talk about that a little bit. And did it really? We don't really know. We'll talk about that when we get to tragedies. At least for comedies, the chorus is out of there. Another innovation is that historians believe that the Greeks might have sung their tragedies and comedies, might have sung that, but there's a little bit more evidence, concrete evidence, that the Romans did sing at least the majority of their comedies. In fact, some estimates, your book, I think, puts it at 50 to 75% of the dialogue we know was in verse and could have been inclined to be sung, was able to be sung very easily. However, evidence that doesn't exist is, for example, sheet music. We simply don't have any of that from the Greek or Roman times. But this maybe is the thought that these things were all sung, the Roman comedies, maybe inspired Stephen Sondheim and his collaborators to write A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, which sort of combines a lot of these Roman comedies together and presents them in a musical form. So after we have old comedy in Greece, then new comedy in Greece, and then we get the Roman times, we get to Roman comedy. So it's similar to the Greek New Comedy. Do you remember what the Greek New Comedy was? The Greek New Comedy featured characters who were lower class, domestic, common people. So you would have things like twins, prostitutes, servants, lovers, the trials and tribulations of that. We got a guest. We got Sesame. Hello. You joining Daddy today? Are you joining Daddy today? Cat on the video. We're learning about comedy, okay? An emphasis on eavesdropping, just like Sesame was eavesdropping on my lecture today. Okay, bye. But that was one of the main conceits of comedy. You would overhear somebody say something, and then you would go and plan something, and then a comic misadventure would ensue. And also, like we talked about in the theater architecture part of this, many times the setting of these was in a public street. So there'd be people's houses upstage, those 3 doors, or maybe the other 2 doors would also be houses. But the action would always take place on a street right in front of these houses. So in that way, the setting of Roman plays did not really change so much, right? It was always the scene of France. That facade, that backdrop was always the same, no matter what. Let's talk about the 2 comedians that we have full records of from Rome. The first one, the earlier one, is Plautus. He was the most popular comic playwright in Rome. You know, his plays were well received and revived. He sort of invents, or he's the earliest sustained known record of a successful Roman comedian. There's a few others before him, but he successfully combined song, dance, and Atellan farce. Remember that? They had the wine lees, and they put it all over their face as sort of a makeup and made a bunch of jokes. So they combined all that with the idea of Greek New Comedy and made this Roman comedy genre. He wrote, his plots usually involve romance and the difficulty of lovers getting together for whatever reason. Much like Greek New Comedy, he depicted characters which were middle class or lower class slaves, servants, not Antigone and Creon and Medea and Jason and all these highborn characters. These are low characters, low-born characters. Comedy is known for fast action. In Medea comes out and she's, the first scene, she's crying and screaming, oh, how can I feel? How can, she's feeling, and she's sort of wallowing in it for a while, which is fine. That's one of the hallmarks of tragedy. But in comedy, it's fast action. And Plautus is great with that, right? Oh, I have an idea. Let's try it out, right? Oh, it failed. I know. Let's try it another way. Oh, it failed. Let's try it this other way. So it's fast action in Plautus's comedies. Sometimes it would be sort of like a tennis match where it's like blah 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 blah. Very fast dialogue. Unlike the even some Greek comedies have long speeches. This was a little bit more succinct, dialogical, characters speaking back and forth. So it says he wrote, anywhere, historians put it 130, 145 plays, probably thereabout, and we get 20 of them. So that's a pretty good amount of plays survived to this time. Plautus writes prologues, though, and his prologues explain the plot of the play you're about to see. So imagine, like, if I'm going to tell you a story, but first I preface the story with a little summary of the story, then I get into the details. That's how Plautus would use his prologues, right? The stuff written before the play starts. He would use them to explain the plot to the audience and then show you, right, depict the plot of the play there on stage. So Plautus explains the plot with his prologues. That's 3 P's if you're counting. Now, in contrast, let's take a look at Terence. Terence comes a little bit later than Plautus. Your book has a little interesting bit about, is he the first playwright of color? We know he was born in Northern Africa. I think Terence's full name is something Africanus, about his area of origin, so the northern part of Africa. He was taken as a slave to some master in Rome, but the master let him write plays, and he was so successful, I think he got freed. His master freed him, and then he went off and as a professional playwright after that. Terence is known for taking from the Greeks. Remember, the Romans loved to borrow, steal from the Greeks. Terence was no stranger to that. In fact, when caught up, when others accused him of just recycling old Greek plots, he says, yes, I do not deny having done so, and I meant to do it again. So plagiarism and intellectual property were not a big concern of Terence. And in the ancient world, before copyright laws in the 1700s, really, that was not a big concern. Anybody could steal anything, pretty much. Terence is featured with having double plots. So plot A and plot B, that sort of mirrored each other as the action rose up to the climax and then resolved here too. Terence would use verbal humor, whereas Plautus was a little bit more physical humor, sort of farce. Terence is a little bit more verbal based, made use of mistaken identity. And in contrast to Plautus, Terence was a little bit cleaner. He had less dirty jokes. We'll read the Brothers Menachmus, and you tell me how many dirty jokes are in that one, and you can think about that yourself. However, one of Terence's innovations was, unlike Plautus, which used his prologue to explain the plot, Terence used his prologues, so the stuff that was written before the play starts, to defend his work. Yeah, so he's using the prologue as explaining and defending any criticism that he might get on his plays. This is an innovation that later on the Romantics and the Victor Hugo, sort of the poster child of the Romantic movement in the 1800s, makes use of. Victor Hugo writes the preface to Cromwell. The preface, he writes this play Cromwell, kind of a crappy play. Nobody really likes it. Nobody really reads it or produces it anymore. But the prologue to Cromwell was longer than the play itself, right? So the prologue that you're writing is longer than the actual thing that you're supposedly making a prologue for. Anyway, it was an example of how a playwright might use a prologue to defend their work. And Terence is the first one that we know to do that. Let's take an example, take a look at an example of one of these prologues used to defend work. So here's prologues, one of Terence's prologues defending Adelphi or the brothers. Here's a quote. Since the poet has found that his writings are carped at by unfair critics, and that his adversaries represent in a bad light the play that we are about to perform, he shall give information about himself. You shall be the judges whether this ought to be esteemed to his praise or his discredit. Okay, so Terence is using the voice of the actor speaking the prologue before the play starts to tell everybody, hey, other people talk some crap about this play, but you know what? You be the judge, right? You be the judge. You're sitting in the audience. You tell me, is it good or bad? Good defense. He's saying, don't let outsiders influence your thought of this play. Here's another one, even longer, from his play called The Mother-in-Law. Now, for my sake, hear with unbiased minds what it is I ask. I again bring before you Hecria, which I have never been allowed to act before you in silence. Such misfortunes have so overwhelmed it. The first time, when I began to act this play, the vauntings of boxers, the expectation of a rope dancer added to which, the throng of followers, the noise and clamor of the women, caused me to retire from your presence before the time. So basically, he's saying the first time he tried to put this play on, there was this commotion. There was a rope dancer and boxers, and people were yelling, and then the audience just left, and he couldn't perform the play. He continues, though. I brought it on again. In the meantime, a rumor spread that the gladiators were about to be exhibited. The populace flocked together, make a tumult, clamor aloud, and fight for their places. I was unable to maintain my place. So the second time he does this play, people get excited about a gladiator, they just leave, or they won't settle down. So he just had to stop. Here it comes. Now there was no confusion. There is attention and silence. An opportunity of acting my play has been granted me. To yourselves is given the power of gracing the scenic festival. For my sake, admit of this plea and attend in silence. So Terence is telling you, this is the third time I'm doing this damn play, so shut up and sit down and watch it, right? Defending his works with the prologue. All right, that's it. Short lecture. If you missed anything, feel free to go back, pause, take notes. You're good to go. Hopefully, I'll feel a little bit better, and we'll be able to meet in class. But anyway, for next time, read Wilson 71 to 81 about Roman tragedy. Sad. And if you want to get ahead, you can read the comedy that we're going to read pretty soon, The Brothers Menechmus. Not a super long play. It reads pretty quick, but it's fairly long. So I would get started on that if I were you. Okay, well, anyway, I've really enjoyed our time together, and I'll hopefully see you in the future. All right, bye.